the story of Ivan the Fool, Leo Tolstoy. Chapter 1. In a certain kingdom there lived a rich peasant who had 3 sons, Simeon, a soldier, Taras Brukan, a fat man, and Ivan, a fool, and 1 daughter, Melania, born dumb. Simeon went to war to serve the Tsar. Taras went to a city and became a merchant, and Ivan, with his sister, remained at home to work on the farm. For his valiant service in the army, Simeon received an estate with high rank and married a noble's daughter. Besides his large pay, he was in receipt of a handsome income from his estate, yet he was unable to make ends meet. What the husband saved, the wife wasted in extravagance. One day, Simeon went to the estate to collect his income, when the steward informed him that there was no income, saying, "We have neither horses, cows, fishing nets, nor implements. It is necessary first to buy everything and then to look for income." Simeon thereupon went to his father and said, "You are rich, Batiushka, little father, but you have given nothing to me. Give me 1/3 of what you possess as my share, and I will transfer it to my estate." The old man replied, "You did not help to bring prosperity to our household. For what reason, then, should you now demand the 1/3 part of everything? It would be unjust to Ivan and his sister." "Yes," said Simeon, "but he is a fool and she was born dumb. What need have they of anything? See what Ivan will say." Ivan's reply was, "Well, let him take his share." Simeon took the portion allotted to him and went again to serve in the army. Taras also met with success. He became rich and married a merchant's daughter, but even this failed to satisfy his desires, and he also went to his father and said, "Give me my share." The old man, however, refused to comply with his request, saying, "You had no hand in the accumulation of our property, and what our household contains is the result of Ivan's hard work. It would be unjust," he repeated, "to Ivan and his sister." Taras replied, "But he does not need it. He is a fool and cannot marry, for no one will have him, and sister does not require anything, for she was born dumb." Turning then to Ivan, he continued, "Give me half the grain you have, and I will not touch the implements or fishing nets, and from the cattle I will take only the dark mare, as she is not fit to plough." Ivan laughed and said, "Well, I will go and arrange matters so that Taras may have his share," whereupon Taras took the brown mare with the grain to town, leaving Ivan with 1 old horse to work on as before and support his father, mother, and sister. Chapter 2. It was disappointing to the starry chert, old devil, that the brothers did not quarrel over the division of the property, and that they separated peacefully, and he cried out, calling his 3 small devils, Chetionki. "See here," said he, "there are living 3 brothers, Simeon the soldier, Taras Brukan, and Ivan the fool. It is necessary that they should quarrel. Now they live peacefully and enjoy each other's hospitality. The fool spoiled all my plans. Now you 3 go and work with them in such a manner that they will be ready to tear each other's eyes out. Can you do this?" "We can," they replied. "How will you accomplish it?" "In this way, we will first ruin them to such an extent that they will have nothing to eat, and we will then gather them together in one place where we are sure that they will fight." "Very well. I see you understand your business. Go, and do not return to me until you have created a feud between the 3 brothers, or I will skin you alive." The 3 small devils went to a swamp to consult as to the best means of accomplishing their mission. They disputed for a long time, each one wanting the easiest part of the work, and not being able to agree, concluded to draw lots, by which it was decided that the one who was first finished had to come and help the others. This agreement being entered into, they appointed a time when they were again to meet in the swamp, to find out who was through and who needed assistance. The time having arrived, the young devils met in the swamp as agreed, when each related his experience. The first, who went to Simeon, said, "I have succeeded in my undertaking, and tomorrow Simeon returns to his father." His comrades, eager for particulars, inquired how he had done it. "Well," he began, "the first thing I did was to blow some courage into his veins, and on the strength of it, Simeon went to the Tsar and offered to conquer the whole world for him. The emperor made him commander-in-chief of the forces and sent him with an army to fight the viceroy of India. Having started on their mission of conquest, they were unaware that I, following in their wake, had wet all their powder. I also went to the Indian ruler and showed him how I could create numberless soldiers from straw. Simeon's army, seeing that they were surrounded by such a vast number of Indian warriors of my creation, became frightened, and Simeon commanded to fire from cannons and rifles, which of course they were unable to do. The soldiers, discouraged, retreated in great disorder. Thus Simeon brought upon himself the terrible disgrace of defeat. His estate was confiscated, and tomorrow he is to be executed. All that remains for me to do, therefore, concluded the young devil, is to release him tomorrow morning. Now then, who wants my assistance?" The second small devil, from Taras, then related his story. "I do not need any help," he began. "My business is also all right. My work with Taras will be finished in 1 week. In the first place, I made him grow thin. He afterwards became so covetous that he wanted to possess everything he saw, and he spent all the money he had in the purchase of immense quantities of goods. When his capital was gone, he still continued to buy with borrowed money, and has become involved in such difficulties that he cannot free himself. At the end of 1 week, the date for the payment of his notes will have expired, and his goods being seized upon, he will become a bankrupt, and he also will return to his father." At the conclusion of this narrative, they inquired of the third devil how things had fared between him and Ivan. "Well," said he, "my report is not so encouraging. The first thing I did was to spit into his jug of kvass, a sour drink made from rye, which made him sick at his stomach. He afterwards went to plough his summer fallow, but I made the soil so hard that the plough could scarcely penetrate it. I thought the fool would not succeed, but he started to work nevertheless. Moaning with pain, he still continued to labor. I broke one plough, but he replaced it with another, fixing it securely, and resumed work. Going beneath the surface of the ground, I took hold of the ploughshares, but did not succeed in stopping Ivan. He pressed so hard, and the coulter was so sharp that my hands were cut, and despite my utmost efforts, he went over all but a small portion of the field. He concluded with, "Come, brothers, and help me, for if we do not conquer him, our whole enterprise will be a failure. If the fool is permitted successfully to conduct his farming, they will have no need, for he will support his brothers." Chapter 3. Ivan, having succeeded in ploughing all but a small portion of his land, he returned the next day to finish it. The pain in his stomach continued, but he felt that he must go on with his work. He tried to start his plough, but it would not move. It seemed to have struck a hard root. It was the small devil in the ground who had wound his feet around the ploughshares and held them. "This is strange," thought Ivan. "There were never any roots here before, and this is surely one." Ivan put his hand in the ground and, feeling something soft, grasped and pulled it out. It was like a root in appearance, but seemed to possess life. Holding it up, he saw that it was a little devil. Disgusted, he exclaimed, "See the nasty thing," and he proceeded to strike it a blow, intending to kill it, when the young devil cried out, "Do not kill me, and I will grant your every wish." "What can you do for me?" "Tell me what it is you most wish for," the little devil replied. Ivan, peasant fashion, scratched the back of his head as he thought, and finally he said, "I am dreadfully sick at my stomach. Can you cure me?" "I can," the little devil said. "Then do so." The little devil bent toward the earth and began searching for roots, and when he found them, he gave them to Ivan, saying, "If you will swallow some of these, you will be immediately cured of whatsoever disease you are afflicted with." Ivan did as directed and obtained instant relief. "I beg of you to let me go now," the little devil pleaded. "I will pass into the earth, never to return." "Very well, you may go, and God bless you." And as Ivan pronounced the name of God, the small devil disappeared into the earth like a flash, and only a slight opening in the ground remained. Ivan placed in his hat what roots he had left and proceeded to plough. Soon finishing his work, he turned his plough over and returned home. When he reached the house, he found his brother Simeon and his wife seated at the supper table. His estate had been confiscated, and he himself had barely escaped execution by making his way out of prison, and having nothing to live upon had come back to his father for support. Turning to Ivan, he said, "I came to ask you to care for us until I can find something to do." "Very well," Ivan replied. "You may remain with us." Just as Ivan was about to sit down to the table, Simeon's wife made a wry face, indicating that she did not like the smell of Ivan's sheepskin coat, and turning to her husband, she said, "I shall not sit at the table with a mujik peasant who smells like that." Simeon the soldier turned to his brother and said, "My lady objects to the smell of your clothes. You may eat in the porch." Ivan said, "Very well. It is all the same to me. I will soon have to go and feed my horse anyway." Ivan took some bread in one hand and his kaftan, coat, in the other, and left the room. Chapter 4. The small devil finished with Simeon that night, and according to agreement went to the assistance of his comrade who had charge of Ivan, that he might help to conquer the fool. He went to the field and searched everywhere, but could find nothing but the hole through which the small devil had disappeared. "Well, this is strange," he said. "Something must have happened to my companion, and I will have to take his place and continue the work he began. The fool is through with his ploughing, so I must look about me for some other means of compassing his destruction. I must overflow his meadow and prevent him from cutting the grass." The little devil accordingly overflowed the meadow with muddy water, and when Ivan went at dawn next morning with his scythe set and sharpened and tried to mow the grass, he found that it resisted all his efforts and would not yield to the implement as usual. Many times Ivan tried to cut the grass, but always without success. At last, becoming weary of the effort, he decided to return home and have his scythe again sharpened, and also to procure a quantity of bread, saying, "I will come back here, and will not leave until I have mown all the meadow, even if it should take a whole week." Hearing this, the little devil became thoughtful, saying, "That Ivan is a kulak, hard case, and I must think of some other way of conquering him." Ivan soon returned with his sharpened scythe and started to mow. The small devil hid himself in the grass, and as the point of the scythe came down, he buried it in the earth and made it almost impossible for Ivan to move the implement. He, however, succeeded in mowing all but one small spot in the swamp, where again the small devil hid himself, saying, "Even if he should cut my hands, I will prevent him from accomplishing his work." When Ivan came to the swamp, he found that the grass was not very thick. Still, the scythe would not work, which made him so angry that he worked with all his might, and one blow more powerful than the others cut off a portion of the small devil's tail, who had hidden himself there. Despite the little devil's efforts, he succeeded in finishing his work when he returned home and ordered his sister to gather up the grass while he went to another field to cut rye. But the devil preceded him there and fixed the rye in such a manner that it was almost impossible for Ivan to cut it. However, after continuous hard labor, he succeeded, and when he was through with the rye, he said to himself, "Now I will start to mow oats." On hearing this, the little devil thought to himself, "I could not prevent him from mowing the rye, but I will surely stop him from mowing the oats when the morning comes." Early next day, when the devil came to the field, he found that the oats had been already mowed. Ivan did it during the night, so as to avoid the loss that might have resulted from the grain being too ripe and dry. Seeing that Ivan again had escaped him, the little devil became greatly enraged, saying, "He cut me all over and made me tired, that fool. I did not meet such misfortune even on the battlefield. He does not even sleep." And the devil began to swear. I cannot follow him," he continued. "I will go now to the heaps and make everything rotten." Accordingly, he went to a heap of the new-mown grain and began his fiendish work. After wetting it, he built a fire and warmed himself, and soon was fast asleep. Ivan harnessed his horse and, with his sister, went to bring the rye home from the field. After lifting a couple of sheaves from the first heap, his pitchfork came into contact with the little devil's back, which caused the latter to howl with pain and to jump around in every direction. Ivan exclaimed, "See here! What nastiness! You again here?" "I am another one," said the little devil. "That was my brother. I am the one who was sent to your brother Simeon." "Well," said Ivan, "it matters not who you are. I will fix you all the same." As Ivan was about to strike the first blow, the devil pleaded, "Let me go, and I will do you no more harm. I will do whatever you wish." "What can you do for me?" asked Ivan. "I can make soldiers from almost anything." "And what will they be good for?" "Oh, they will do everything for you." "Can they sing?" "They can." "Well, make them. Take a bunch of straw and scatter it on the ground, and see if each straw will not turn into a soldier." Ivan shook the straws on the ground, and, as he expected, each straw turned into a soldier, and they began marching with a band at their head. "Ishti, look you, that was well done. How it will delight the village maidens," he exclaimed. The small devil now said, "Let me go, you do not need me any longer." But Ivan said, "No, I will not let you go just yet. You have converted the straw into soldiers, and now I want you to turn them again into straw, as I cannot afford to lose it, but I want it with the grain on." The devil replied, "Say, so many soldiers, so much straw." Ivan did as directed and got back his rye with the straw. The small devil again begged for his release. Ivan, taking him from the pitchfork, said, "With God's blessing you may depart." And as before, at the mention of God's name, the little devil was hurled into the earth like a flash, and nothing was left but the hole to show where he had gone. Soon afterwards, Ivan returned home to find his brother Taras and his wife there. Taras Brukan could not pay his debts and was forced to flee from his creditors and seek refuge under his father's roof. Seeing Ivan, he said, "Well, Ivan, may we remain here until I start in some new business?" Ivan replied, as he had before to Simeon, "Yes, you are perfectly welcome to remain here as long as it suits you." With that announcement, he removed his coat and seated himself at the supper table with the others. But Taras Brukan's wife objected to the smell of his clothes, saying, "I cannot eat with a fool, neither can I stand the smell." Then Taras Brukan said, "Ivan, from your clothes there comes a bad smell. Go and eat by yourself in the porch." "Very well," said Ivan, and he took some bread and went out as ordered, saying, "It is time for me to feed my mare." Chapter 5. The small devil who had charge of Taras finished with him that night, and according to agreement proceeded to the assistance of the other two to help them conquer Ivan. Arriving at the ploughed field, he looked around for his comrades, but found only the hole through which one had disappeared, and on going to the meadow, he discovered the severed tail of the other, and in the rye field he found yet another hole. "Well," he thought, "it is quite clear that my comrades have met with some great misfortune, and that I will have to take their places and arrange the feud between the brothers." The small devil then went in search of Ivan, but he, having finished with the field, was nowhere to be found. He had gone to the forest to cut logs to build homes for his brothers, as they found it inconvenient for so many to live under the same roof. The small devil at last discovered his whereabouts, and going to the forest, climbed into the branches of the trees and began to interfere with Ivan's work. Ivan cut down a tree, which failed, however, to fall to the ground, becoming entangled in the branches of other trees. Yet he succeeded in getting it down after a hard struggle. In chopping down the next tree, he met with the same difficulties, and also with the third. Ivan had supposed he could cut down 50 trees in a day, but he succeeded in chopping but 10 before darkness put an end to his labors for a time. He was now exhausted, and perspiring profusely, he sat down alone in the woods to rest. He soon after resumed his work, cutting down one more tree, but the effort gave him a pain in his back, and he was obliged to rest again. Seeing this, the small devil was full of joy. "Well," he thought, "now he is exhausted and will stop work, and I will rest also." He then seated himself on some branches and rejoiced. Ivan again arose, however, and taking his axe, gave the tree a terrific blow from the opposite side, which felled it instantly to the ground, carrying the little devil with it. And Ivan, proceeding to cut the branches, found the devil alive. Very much astonished, Ivan exclaimed, "Look you! Such nastiness! Are you again here?" "I am another one," replied the devil. "I was with your brother Taras." "Well," said Ivan, "that makes no difference. I will fix you." And he was about to strike him a blow with the axe when the devil pleaded, "Do not kill me, and whatever you wish you shall have." Ivan asked, "What can you do?" "I can make for you all the money you wish." Ivan then told the devil he might proceed, whereupon the latter began to explain to him how he might become rich. "Take," said he to Ivan, "the leaves of this oak tree and rub them in your hands, and the gold will fall to the ground." Ivan did as he was directed, and immediately the gold began to drop about his feet, and he remarked, "This will be a fine trick to amuse the village boys with." "Can I now take my departure?" asked the devil, to which Ivan replied, "With God's blessing you may go." At the mention of the name of God, the devil disappeared into the earth. Chapter 6. The brothers, having finished their houses, moved into them and lived apart from their father and brother. Ivan, when he had completed his ploughing, made a great feast, to which he invited his brothers, telling them that he had plenty of beer for them to drink. The brothers, however, declined Ivan's hospitality, saying, "We have seen the beer mujiks drink, and want none of it." Ivan then gathered around him all the peasants in the village, and with them drank beer until he became intoxicated, when he joined the Khorovody, a street gathering of the village boys and girls who sing songs, and told them they must sing his praises, saying that in return he would show them such sights as they had never before seen in their lives. The little girls laughed and began to sing songs praising Ivan, and when they had finished, they said, "Very well. Now give us what you said you would." Ivan replied, "I will soon show you," and taking an empty bag in his hand, he started for the woods. The little girls laughed as they said, "What a fool he is!" And resuming their play, they forgot all about him. Some time after, Ivan suddenly appeared among them, carrying in his hand the bag, which was now filled. "Shall I divide this with you?" he said. "Yes, divide," they sang in chorus. So Ivan put his hand into the bag and drew it out full of gold coins, which he scattered among them. "Batyushka!" they cried as they ran to gather up the precious pieces. The mujiks then appeared on the scene and began to fight among themselves for the possession of the yellow objects. In the melee, one old woman was nearly crushed to death. Ivan laughed and was greatly amused at the sight of so many persons quarreling over a few pieces of gold. "Oh, you Durachki, little fools," he said. "Why did you almost crush the life out of the old grandmother? Be more gentle. I have plenty more, and I will give them to you." Whereupon he began throwing about more of the coins. The people gathered around him, and Ivan continued throwing until he emptied his bag. They clamored for more, but Ivan replied, "The gold is all gone. Another time I will give you more. Now we will resume our singing and dancing." The little children sang, but Ivan said to them, "Your songs are no good." The children said, "Then show us how to sing better." To this Ivan replied, "I will show you people who can sing better than you." With that remark, Ivan went to the barn and, securing a bundle of straw, did as the little devil had directed him, and presently a regiment of soldiers appeared in the village street, and he ordered them to sing and dance. The people were astonished and could not understand how Ivan had produced the strangers. The soldiers sang for some time, to the great delight of the villagers, and when Ivan commanded them to stop, they instantly ceased. Ivan then ordered them off to the barn, telling the astonished and mystified mujiks that they must not follow him. Reaching the barn, he turned the soldiers again into straw and went home to sleep off the effects of his debauch. Chapter 7. The next morning, Ivan's exploits were the talk of the village, and news of the wonderful things he had done reached the ears of his brother Simeon, who immediately went to Ivan to learn all about it. "Explain to me," he said, "from whence did you bring the soldiers, and where did you take them?" "And what do you wish to know for?" asked Ivan. "Why, with soldiers we can do almost anything we wish. Whole kingdoms can be conquered," replied Simeon. This information greatly surprised Ivan, who said, "Well, why did you not tell me about this before? I can make as many as you want." Ivan then took his brother to the barn, but he said, "While I am willing to create the soldiers, you must take them away from here, for if it should become necessary to feed them, all the food in the village would last them only one day." Simeon promised to do as Ivan wished, whereupon Ivan proceeded to convert the straw into soldiers. Out of one bundle of straw, he made an entire regiment. In fact, so many soldiers appeared as if by magic that there was not a vacant spot in the field. Turning to Simeon, Ivan said, "Well, is there a sufficient number?" Beaming with joy, Simeon replied, "Enough, enough. Thank you, Ivan." "Glad you are satisfied," said Ivan, "and if you wish more, I will make them for you. I have plenty of straw now." Simeon divided his soldiers into battalions and regiments, and after having drilled them, he went forth to fight and to conquer. Simeon had just gotten safely out of the village with his soldiers when Taras, the other brother, appeared before Ivan. He also, having heard of the previous day's performance and wanting to learn the secret of his power. He sought Ivan, saying, "Tell me the secret of your supply of gold, for if I had plenty of money, I could with its assistance gather in all the wealth in the world." Ivan was greatly surprised on hearing this statement and said, "You might have told me this before, for I can obtain for you as much money as you wish." Taras was delighted, and he said, "You might get me about 3 bushels. "Well," said Ivan, "we will go to the woods, or better still, we will harness the horse, as we could not possibly carry so much money ourselves." The brothers went to the woods, and Ivan proceeded to gather the oak leaves, which he rubbed between his hands, the dust falling to the ground and turning into gold pieces as quickly as it fell. When quite a pile had accumulated, Ivan turned to Taras and asked if he had rubbed enough leaves into money, whereupon Taras replied, "Thank you, Ivan. That will be sufficient for this time." Ivan then said, "If you wish more, come to me, and I will rub as much as you want, for there are plenty of leaves." Taras, with his tarantas, wagon filled with gold, rode away to the city to engage in trade and increase his wealth, and thus both brothers went their way, Simeon to fight and Taras to trade. Simeon's soldiers conquered a kingdom for him, and Taras Brucan made plenty of money. Sometime afterwards, the two brothers met and confessed to each other the source from whence sprang their prosperity, but they were not yet satisfied. Simeon said, "I have conquered a kingdom and enjoy a very pleasant life, but I have not sufficient money to procure food for my soldiers," while Taras confessed that he was the possessor of enormous wealth, but the care of it caused him much uneasiness. "Let us go again to our brother," said Simeon. "I will order him to make more soldiers and will give them to you, and you may then tell him that he must make more money so that we can buy food for them." They went again to Ivan, and Simeon said, "I have not sufficient soldiers. I want you to make me at least 2 divisions more." But Ivan shook his head as he said, "I will not create soldiers for nothing. You must pay me for doing it." Well, but you promised, said Simeon. I know I did, replied Ivan, but I have changed my mind since that time. But fool, why will you not do as you promised? For the reason that your soldiers kill men, and I will not make any more for such a cruel purpose. With this reply, Ivan remained stubborn and would not create any more soldiers. Taras Brucan next approached Ivan and ordered him to make more money, but, as in the case of Taras, Ivan only shook his head as he said, I will not make you any money unless you pay me for doing it. I cannot work without pay. Taras then reminded him of his promise. I know I promised, replied Ivan, but still I must refuse to do as you wish. But why, fool, will you not fulfill your promise? Asked Taras. For the reason that your gold was the means of depriving Mikhailovna of her cow. But how did that happen? Inquired Taras. It happened in this way, said Ivan. Mikhailovna always kept a cow, and her children had plenty of milk to drink. But some time ago, one of her boys came to me to beg for some milk, and I asked, Where is your cow? When he replied, A clerk of Taras. Brucan came to our home and offered 3 gold pieces for her. Our mother could not resist the temptation, and now we have no milk to drink. I gave you the gold pieces for your pleasure, and you put them to such poor use that I will not give you any more. The brothers, on hearing this, took their departure to discuss as to the best plan to pursue in regard to a settlement of their troubles. Simeon said, Let us arrange it in this way. I will give you the half of my kingdom and soldiers to keep guard over your wealth, and you give me money to feed the soldiers in my half of the kingdom. To this arrangement, Taras agreed, and both the brothers became rulers and very happy. Chapter 8. Ivan remained on the farm and worked to support his father, mother, and dumb sister. Once it happened that the old dog, which had grown up on the farm, was taken sick when Ivan thought he was dying, and taking pity on the animal, placed some bread in his hat and carried it to him. It happened that when he turned out the bread, the root which the little devil had given him fell out also. The old dog swallowed it with the bread and was almost instantly cured when he jumped up and began to wag his tail as an expression of joy. Ivan's father and mother, seeing the dog cured so quickly, asked by what means he had performed such a miracle. Ivan replied, I had some roots which would cure any disease, and the dog swallowed one of them. It happened about that time that the Tsar's daughter became ill, and her father had it announced in every city, town, and village that whosoever would cure her would be richly rewarded, and if the lucky person should prove to be a single man, he would give her in marriage to him. This announcement, of course, appeared in Ivan's village. Ivan's father and mother called him and said, If you have any of those wonderful roots, go and cure the Tsar's daughter. You will be much happier for having performed such a kind act. Indeed, you will be made happy for all your afterlife. Very well, said Ivan, and he immediately made ready for the journey. As he reached the porch on his way out, he saw a poor woman standing directly in his path and holding a broken arm. The woman accosted him, saying, I was told that you could cure me, and will you not please do so, as I am powerless to do anything for myself? Ivan replied, Very well, my poor woman, I will relieve you if I can. He produced a root which he handed to the poor woman and told her to swallow it. She did as Ivan told her and was instantly cured, and went away rejoicing that she had recovered the use of her arm. Ivan's father and mother came out to wish him good luck on his journey, and to them he told the story of the poor woman, saying that he had given her his last root. On hearing this, his parents were much distressed, as they now believed him to be without the means of curing the Tsar's daughter, and began to scold him. You had pity for a beggar, and gave no thought to the Tsar's daughter, they said. I have pity for the Tsar's daughter also, replied Ivan, after which he harnessed his horse to his wagon and took his seat ready for his departure, whereupon his parents said, Where are you going, you fool? to cure the Tsar's daughter, and without anything to do it with. "Very well," replied Ivan as he drove away. In due time he arrived at the palace, and the moment he appeared on the balcony, the Tsar's daughter was cured. The Tsar was overjoyed and ordered Ivan to be brought into his presence. He dressed him in the richest robes and addressed him as his son-in-law. Ivan was married to the Tsarevna, and the Tsar dying soon after, Ivan became ruler. Thus the three brothers became rulers in different kingdoms. Chapter 9. The brothers lived and reigned. Simeon, the eldest brother, with his straw soldiers took captive the genuine soldiers and trained all alike. He was feared by everyone. Taras Brukan, the other brother, did not squander the gold he obtained from Ivan, but instead greatly increased his wealth and at the same time lived well. He kept his money in large trunks, and while having more than he knew what to do with, still continued to collect money from his subjects. The people had to work for the money to pay the taxes which Taras levied on them, and life was made burdensome to them. Ivan the Fool did not enjoy his wealth and power to the same extent as did his brothers. As soon as his father-in-law, the late Tsar, was buried, he discarded the imperial robes which had fallen to him and told his wife to put them away, as he had no further use for them. Having cast aside the insignia of his rank, he once more donned his peasant garb and started to work as of old. "I felt lonesome," he said, "and began to grow enormously stout, and yet I had no appetite, and neither could I sleep." Ivan sent for his father, mother, and dumb sister, and brought them to live with him, and they worked with him at whatever he chose to do. The people soon learned that Ivan was a fool. His wife one day said to him, "The people say you are a fool, Ivan." "Well, let them think so if they wish," he replied. His wife pondered this reply for some time, and at last decided that if Ivan was a fool, she also was one, and that it would be useless to go contrary to her husband, thinking in her mind of the old proverb that, "Where the needle goes, there goes the thread also." She therefore cast aside her magnificent robes, and putting them into the trunk with Ivan's, dressed herself in cheap clothing and joined her dumb sister-in-law with the intention of learning to work. She succeeded so well that she soon became a great help to Ivan. Seeing that Ivan was a fool, all the wise men left the kingdom, and only the fools remained. They had no money, their wealth consisting only of the products of their labor, but they lived peacefully together, supported themselves in comfort, and had plenty to spare for the needy and afflicted. Chapter 10. The old devil grew tired of waiting for the good news which he expected the little devils to bring him. He waited in vain to hear of the ruin of the brothers, so he went in search of the emissaries which he had sent to perform that work for him. After looking around for some time and seeing nothing but the 3 holes in the ground, he decided that they had not succeeded in their work, and that he would have to do it himself. The old devil next went in search of the brothers, but he could learn nothing of their whereabouts. After some time he found them in their different kingdoms, contented and happy. This greatly incensed the old devil, and he said, "I will now have to accomplish their mission myself." He first visited Simeon the soldier and appeared before him as a voyevoda, general, saying, "You, Simeon, are a great warrior, and I also have had considerable experience in warfare and am desirous of serving you." Simeon questioned the disguised devil, and seeing that he was an intelligent man, took him into his service. The new general taught Simeon how to strengthen his army until it became very powerful. New implements of warfare were introduced. Cannons capable of throwing 100 balls a minute were also constructed, and these, it was expected, would be of deadly effect in battle. Simeon, on the advice of his new general, ordered all young men above a certain age to report for drill. On the same advice, Simeon established gun shops, where immense numbers of cannons and rifles were made. The next move of the new general was to have Simeon declare war against the neighboring kingdom. This he did, and with his immense army marched into the adjoining territory, which he pillaged and burned, destroying more than half the enemy's soldiers. This so frightened the ruler of that country that he willingly gave up half of his kingdom to save the other half. Simeon, overjoyed at his success, declared his intention of marching into Indian territory and subduing the viceroy of that country. But Simeon's intentions reached the ears of the Indian ruler, who prepared to do battle with him. In addition to having secured all the latest implements of warfare, he added still others of his own invention. He ordered all boys over 14 and all single women to be drafted into the army until its proportions became much larger than Simeon's. His cannons and rifles were of the same pattern as Simeon's, and he invented a flying machine from which bombs could be thrown into the enemy's camp. Simeon went forth to conquer the viceroy with full confidence in his own powers to succeed. This time, luck forsook him, and instead of being the conqueror, he was himself conquered. The Indian ruler had so arranged his army that Simeon could not even get within shooting distance, while the bombs from the flying machine carried destruction and terror in their path, completely routing his army, so that Simeon was left alone. The viceroy took possession of his kingdom, and Simeon had to fly for his life. Having finished with Simeon, the old devil next approached Taras. He appeared before him disguised as one of the merchants of his kingdom, and established factories and began to make money. The merchant paid the highest price for everything he purchased, and the people ran after him to sell their goods. Through this merchant, they were enabled to make plenty of money, paying up all their arrears of taxes as well as the others when they came due. Taras was overjoyed at this condition of affairs and said, "Thanks to this merchant, now I will have more money than before, and life will be much pleasanter for me." He wished to erect new buildings and advertised for workmen, offering the highest prices for all kinds of labor. Taras thought the people would be as anxious to work as formerly, but instead he was much surprised to learn that they were working for the merchant. Thinking to induce them to leave the merchant, he increased his offers, but the former, equal to the emergency, also raised the wages of his workmen. Taras, having plenty of money, increased the offers still more, but the merchant raised them still higher and got the better of him. Thus, defeated at every point, Taras was compelled to abandon the idea of building. Taras next announced that he intended laying out gardens and erecting fountains, and the work was to be commenced in the fall, but no one came to offer his services, and again he was obliged to forego his intentions. Winter set in, and Taras wanted some sable fur with which to line his greatcoat, and he sent his man to procure it for him, but that the servant returned without it, saying, "There are no sables to be had. The merchant has bought them all, paying a very high price for them." Taras needed horses and sent a messenger to purchase them, but he returned with the same story as on former occasions, that none were to be found, the merchant having bought them all to carry water for an artificial pond he was constructing. Taras was at last compelled to suspend business, as he could not find anyone willing to work for him. They had all gone over to the merchant's side. The only dealings the people had with Taras were when they went to pay their taxes. His money accumulated so fast that he could not find a place to put it, and his life became miserable. He abandoned all idea of entering upon the new venture and only thought of how to exist peaceably. This he found it difficult to do, for turn which way he would, fresh obstacles confronted him. Even his cooks, coachmen, and all his other servants forsook him and joined the merchant. With all his wealth, he had nothing to eat, and when he went to market, he found the merchant had been there before him and had bought up all the provisions. Still, the people continued to bring him money. Taras at last became so indignant that he ordered the merchant out of his kingdom. He left, but settled just outside the boundary line and continued his business with the same result as before, and Taras was frequently forced to go without food for days. It was rumored that the merchant wanted to buy even Taras himself. On hearing this, the latter became very much alarmed and could not decide as to the best course to pursue. About this time, his brother Simeon arrived in the kingdom and said, "Help me. for I have been defeated and ruined by the Indian viceroy." Taras replied, "How can I help you when I have had no food myself for 2 days?" Chapter 11. The old devil, having finished with the second brother, went to Ivan the Fool. This time he disguised himself as a general, the same as in the case of Simeon, and appearing before Ivan said, "Get an army together. It is disgraceful for the ruler of a kingdom to be without an army. You call your people to assemble, and I will form them into a fine, large army." Ivan took the supposed general's advice and said, "Well, you may form my people into an army, but you must also teach them to sing the songs I like." The old devil then went through Ivan's kingdom to secure recruits for the army, saying, "Come, shave your heads. The heads of recruits are always shaved in Russia, and I will give each of you a red hat and plenty of vodka, whiskey." At this, the fools only laughed and said, "We can have all the vodka we want, for we distill it ourselves, and of hats, our little girls make all we want, of any color we please, and with handsome fringes." Thus was the devil foiled in securing recruits for his army. So he returned to Ivan and said, "Your fools will not volunteer to be soldiers. It will therefore be necessary to force them." "Very well," replied Ivan. "You may use force if you want to." The old devil then announced that all the fools must become soldiers, and those who refused, Ivan would punish with death. The fools went to the general and said, "You tell us that Ivan will punish with death all those who refuse to become soldiers, but you have omitted to state what will be done with us soldiers. We have been told that we are only to be killed." "Yes, that is true," was the reply. The fools, on hearing this, became stubborn and refused to go. "Better kill us now if we cannot avoid death, but we will not become soldiers," they declared. "Oh, you fools," said the old devil. "Soldiers may and may not be killed, but if you disobey Ivan's orders, you will find certain death at his hands." The fools remained absorbed in thought for some time, and finally went to Ivan to question him in regard to the matter. On arriving at his house, they said, "A general came to us with an order from you that we were all to become soldiers, and if we refused, you were to punish us with death. Is it true?" Ivan began to laugh heartily on hearing this and said, "Well, how I alone can punish you with death is something I cannot understand. If I was not a fool myself, I would be able to explain it to you, but as it is, I cannot." "Well then, we will not go," they said. "Very well," replied Ivan. "You need not become soldiers unless you wish to." The old devil, seeing his schemes about to prove failures, went to the ruler of Tarakania and became his friend, saying, "Let us go and conquer Ivan's kingdom. He has no money, but he has plenty of cattle, provisions, and various other things that would be useful to us." The Tarakanian ruler gathered his large army together and, equipping it with cannons and rifles, crossed the boundary line into Ivan's kingdom. The people went to Ivan and said, "The ruler of Tarakania is here with a large army to fight us." "Let them come," replied Ivan. The Tarakanian ruler, after crossing the line into Ivan's kingdom, looked in vain for soldiers to fight against, and waiting some time and none appearing, he sent his own warriors to attack the villages. They soon reached the first village, which they began to plunder. The fools of both sexes looked calmly on, offering not the least resistance when their cattle and provisions were being taken from them. On the contrary, they invited the soldiers to come and live with them, saying, "If you, dear friends, find it is difficult to earn a living in your own land, come and live with us, where everything is plentiful." The soldiers decided to remain, finding the people happy and prosperous, with enough surplus food to supply many of their neighbors. They were surprised at the cordial greetings which they everywhere received, and returning to the ruler of Tarakania, they said, "We cannot fight with these people. Take us to another place. We would much prefer the dangers of actual warfare to this unsoldierly method of subduing the village." The Tarakanian ruler, becoming enraged, ordered the soldiers to destroy the whole kingdom, plunder the villages, burn the houses and provisions, and slaughter the cattle. "Should you disobey my orders," said he, "I will have every one of you executed." The soldiers, becoming frightened, started to do as they were ordered, but the fools wept bitterly, offering no resistance, men, women, and children all joining in the general lamentation. "Why do you treat us so cruelly?" they cried to the invading soldiers. "Why do you wish to destroy everything we have? If you have more need of these things than we have, why not take them with you and leave us in peace?" The soldiers, becoming saddened with remorse, refused further to pursue their path of destruction, the entire army scattering in many directions. Chapter 12. The old devil, failing to ruin Ivan's kingdom with soldiers, transformed himself into a nobleman dressed exquisitely and became one of Ivan's subjects, with the intention of compassing the downfall of his kingdom, as he had done with that of Taras. The nobleman said to Ivan, "I desire to teach you wisdom and to render you other service. I will build you a palace and factories." "Very well," said Ivan, "you may live with us." The next day, the nobleman appeared on the square with a sack of gold in his hand and a plan for building a house, saying to the people, "You are living like pigs, and I am going to teach you how to live decently. You are to build a house for me according to this plan. I will superintend the work myself and will pay you for your services in gold," showing them at the same time the contents of his sack. The fools were amused. They had never before seen any money. Their business was conducted entirely by exchange of farm products or by hiring themselves out to work by the day in return for whatever they most needed. They therefore glanced at the gold pieces with amazement and said, what nice toys they would be to play with. In return for the gold, they gave their services and brought the nobleman the produce of their farms. The old devil was overjoyed as he thought, "Now my enterprise is on a fair road, and I will be able to ruin the fool, as I did his brothers." The fools obtained sufficient gold to distribute among the entire community, the women and young girls of the village wearing much of it as ornaments, while to the children they gave some pieces to play with on the streets. When they had secured all they wanted, they stopped working, and the nobleman did not get his house more than half finished. He had neither provisions nor cattle for the year, and ordered the people to bring him both. He directed them also to go on with the building of the palace and factories. He promised to pay them liberally in gold for everything they did. No one responded to his call. Only once in a while, a little boy or girl would call to exchange eggs for his gold. Thus was the nobleman deserted, and having nothing to eat, he went to the village to procure some provisions for his dinner. He went to one house and offered gold in return for a chicken, but was refused, the owner saying, "We have enough of that already and do not want any more." He next went to a fishwoman to buy some herring, when she, too, refused to accept his gold in return for fish, saying, "I do not wish it, my dear man. I have no children to whom I can give it to play with. I have 3 pieces which I keep as curiosities only." He then went to a peasant to buy bread, but he also refused to accept the gold. "I have no use for it," said he, "unless you wish to give it for Christ's sake. Then it will be a different matter, and I will tell my Baba, old woman, to cut a piece of bread for you." The old devil was so angry that he ran away from the peasant, spitting and cursing as he went. Not only did the offer to accept in the name of Christ anger him, but the very mention of the name was like the thrust of a knife in his throat. The old devil did not succeed in getting any bread, and in his efforts to secure other articles of food, he met with the same failure. The people had all the gold they wanted, and what pieces they had they regarded as curiosities. They said to the old devil, "If you bring us something else in exchange for food, or come to ask for Christ's sake, we will give you all you want." But the old devil had nothing but gold and was too lazy to work, and being unable to accept anything for Christ's sake, he was greatly enraged. "What else do you want?" he said. "I will give you gold with which you can buy everything you want, and you need labor, no longer. But the fools wouldn't accept his gold, nor listen to him. Thus the old devil was obliged to go to sleep hungry. Tidings of this condition of affairs soon reached the ears of Ivan. The people went to him and said, "What shall we do? This nobleman appeared among us. He is well dressed. He wishes to eat and drink of the best, but is unwilling to work and does not beg for food for Christ's sake. He only offers everyone gold pieces. At first we gave him everything he wanted, taking the gold pieces in exchange just as curiosities. But now we have enough of them and refuse to accept any more from him. What shall we do with him? He may die of hunger." Ivan heard all they had to say and told them to employ him as a shepherd, taking turns in doing so. The old devil saw no other way out of the difficulty and was obliged to submit. It soon came the old devil's turn to go to Ivan's house. He went there to dinner and found Ivan's dumb sister preparing the meal. She was often cheated by the lazy people who, while they did not work, yet ate up all the gruel. But she learned to know the lazy people from the condition of their hands. Those with great welts on their hands she invited first to the table, and those having smooth white hands had to take what was left. The old devil took a seat at the table, but the dumb girl, taking his hands, looked at them, and seeing them white and clean, and with long nails, swore at him and put him from the table. Ivan's wife said to the old devil, "You must excuse my sister-in-law. She will not allow anyone to sit at the table whose hands have not been hardened by toil, so you will have to wait until the dinner is over, and then you can have what is left. With it, you must be satisfied." The old devil was very much offended that he was made to eat with pigs, as he expressed it, and complained to Ivan, saying, "The foolish law you have in your kingdom that all persons must work is surely the invention of fools. People who work for a living are not always forced to labor with their hands. Do you think wise men labor so?" Ivan replied, "Well, what do fools know about it? We all work with our hands." "And for that reason, you are fools," replied the devil. "I can teach you how to use your brains, and you will find such labor more beneficial." Ivan was surprised at hearing this and said, "Well, it is perhaps not without good reason that we are called fools." "It is not so easy to work with the brain," the old devil said. "You will not give me anything to eat because my hands have not the appearance of being toil-hardened, but you must understand that it is much harder to do brain work, and sometimes the head feels like bursting with the effort it is forced to make." "Then why do you not select some light work that you can perform with your hands?" Ivan asked. The devil said, "I torment myself with brain work because I have pity for you fools. For if I did not torture myself, people like you would remain fools for all eternity. I have exercised my brain a great deal during my life, and now I am able to teach you." Ivan was greatly surprised and said, "Very well, teach us, so that when our hands are tired, we can use our heads to replace them." The devil promised to instruct the people, and Ivan announced the fact throughout his kingdom. The devil was willing to teach all those who came to him how to use the head instead of the hands, so as to produce more with the former than with the latter. In Ivan's kingdom, there was a high tower, which was reached by a long, narrow ladder leading up to the balcony, and Ivan told the old devil that from the top of the tower, everyone could see him. So the old devil went up to the balcony and addressed the people. The fools came in great crowds to hear what the old devil had to say, thinking that he really meant to tell them how to work with the head. But the old devil only told them in words what to do, and did not give them any practical instruction. He said that men working only with their hands could not make a living. The fools did not understand what he said to them and looked at him in amazement, and then departed for their daily work. The old devil addressed them for 2 days from the balcony, and at the end of that time, feeling hungry, he asked the people to bring him some bread. But they only laughed at him and told him if he could work better with his head than with his hands, he could also find bread for himself. He addressed the people for yet another day, and they went to hear him from curiosity, but soon left him to return to their work. Ivan asked. "Well, did the nobleman work with his head?" "Not yet," they said. "So far he has only talked." One day, while the old devil was standing on the balcony, he became weak and, falling down, hurt his head against a pole. Seeing this, one of the fools ran to Ivan's wife and said, "The gentleman has at last commenced to work with his head." She ran to the field to tell Ivan, who was much surprised, and said, "Let us go and see him." He turned his horses' heads in the direction of the tower, where the old devil remained weak from hunger and was still suspended from the pole, with his body swaying back and forth and his head striking the lower part of the pole each time it came in contact with it. While Ivan was looking, the old devil started down the steps head first, as they supposed, to count them. "Well," said Ivan, "he told the truth after all, that sometimes from this kind of work the head bursts. This is far worse than welts on the hands." The old devil fell to the ground head foremost. Ivan approached him, but at that instant the ground opened and the devil disappeared, leaving only a hole to show where he had gone. Ivan scratched his head and said, "See here, such nastiness. This is yet another devil. He looks like the father of the little ones." Ivan still lives, and people flock to his kingdom. His brothers come to him, and he feeds them. To everyone who comes to him and says, "Give us food," he replies, "Very well, you are welcome. We have plenty of everything." There is only one unchangeable custom observed in Ivan's kingdom. The man with toil-hardened hands is always given a seat at the table, while the possessor of soft white hands must be contented with what is left. There are no guilty people. Leo Tolstoy. 1. Mine is a strange and wonderful lot. The chances are that there is not a single wretched beggar suffering under the luxury and oppression of the rich who feels anything like as keenly as I do either the injustice, the cruelty, and the horror of their oppression of and contempt for the poor, or the grinding humiliation and misery which befall the great majority of the workers, the real producers of all that makes life possible. I have felt this for a long time, and as the years have passed by, the feeling has grown and grown until recently it reached its climax. Although I feel all this so vividly, I still live on amid the depravity and sins of rich society, and I cannot leave it, because I have neither the knowledge nor the strength to do so. I cannot. I do not know how to change my life so that my physical needs, food, sleep, clothing, my going to and fro, may be satisfied without a sense of shame and wrongdoing in the position which I fill. There was a time when I tried to change my position, which was not in harmony with my conscience, but the conditions created by the past, by my family and its claims upon me, were so complicated that they would not let me out of their grasp, or rather, I did not know how to free myself. I had not the strength. Now that I am over 80 and have become feeble, I have given up trying to free myself. And strange to say, as my feebleness increases, I realize more and more strongly the wrongfulness of my position, and it grows more and more intolerable to me. It has occurred to me that I do not occupy this position for nothing, that Providence intended that I should lay bare the truth of my feelings, so that I might atone for all that causes my suffering, and might perhaps open the eyes of those, or at least of some of those, who are still blind to what I see so clearly, and thus might lighten the burden of that vast majority who, under existing conditions, are subjected to bodily and spiritual suffering by those who deceive them, and also deceive themselves. Indeed, it may be that the position which I occupy gives me special facilities for revealing the artificial and criminal relations which exist between men, for telling the whole truth in regard to that position without confusing the issue by attempting to vindicate myself, and without rousing the envy of the rich and feelings of oppression in the hearts of the poor and downtrodden. I am so placed that I not only have no desire to vindicate myself, but, on the contrary, I find it necessary to make an effort lest I should exaggerate the wickedness of the great among whom I live, of whose society I am ashamed, whose attitude towards their fellow men I detest with my whole soul, though I find it impossible to separate my lot from theirs. But I must also avoid the error of those democrats and others who, in defending the oppressed and the enslaved, do not see their failings and mistakes, and who do not make sufficient allowance for the difficulties created, the mistakes inherited from the past, which in a degree lessens the responsibility of the upper classes. Free from desire for self-vindication, free from fear of an emancipated people, free from that envy and hatred which the oppressed feel for their oppressors, I am in the best possible position to see the truth and to tell it. Perhaps that is why Providence placed me in such a position. I will do my best to turn it to account. 2. Alexander Ivanovich Volgin, a bachelor and a clerk in a Moscow bank at a salary of 8,000 rubles a year, a man much respected in his own set, was staying in a country house. His host was a wealthy landowner owning some 2,500 acres and had married his guest's cousin. Volgin, tired after an evening spent in playing vint for small stakes with members of the family, went to his room and placed his watch, silver cigarette case, pocketbook, big leather purse, and pocket brush and comb on a small table covered with a white cloth, and then, taking off his coat, waistcoat, shirt, trousers and underclothes, his silk socks and English boots, put on his nightshirt and dressing gown. His watch pointed to midnight. Volgin smoked a cigarette, lay on his face for about 5 minutes reviewing the day's impressions. Then, blowing out his candle, he turned over on his side and fell asleep about 1 o'clock, in spite of a good deal of restlessness. Awaking next morning at 8, he put on his slippers and dressing gown and rang the bell. The old butler, Stephen, the father of a family and the grandfather of 6 grandchildren who had served in that house for 30 years, entered the room hurriedly, with bent legs, carrying in the newly blackened boots which Volgin had taken off the night before, a well-brushed suit and a clean shirt. The guest thanked him and then asked what the weather was like. The blinds were drawn so that the sun should not prevent anyone from sleeping till 11 o'clock if he were so inclined, and whether his hosts had slept well. He glanced at his watch. It was still early, and began to wash and dress. His water was ready, and everything on the washing stand and dressing table was ready for use and properly laid out. His soap, his tooth and hairbrushes, his nail scissors and files. He washed his hands and face in a leisurely fashion, cleaned and manicured his nails, pushed back the skin with the towel, and sponged his stout white body from head to foot. Then he began to brush his hair. Standing in front of the mirror, he first brushed his curly beard, which was beginning to turn grey, with 2 English brushes, parting it down the middle. Then he combed his hair, which was already showing signs of getting thin, with a large tortoise-shell comb. Putting on his underlinen, his socks, his boots, his trousers, which were held up by elegant braces, and his waistcoat, he sat down coatless in an easy chair to rest after dressing, lit a cigarette, and began to think where he should go for a walk that morning, to the park or to Littleport's. What a funny name for a wood. He thought he would go to Littleport's. Then he must answer Simon Nikolaevich's letter, but there was time enough for that. Getting up with an air of resolution, he took out his watch. It was already 5 minutes to 9. He put his watch into his waistcoat pocket and his purse, with all that was left of the 180 rubles he had taken for his journey and for the incidental expenses of his fortnight's stay with his cousin. And then he placed into his trouser pocket his cigarette case and electric cigarette lighter and 2 clean handkerchiefs into his coat pockets, and went out of the room, leaving as usual the mess and confusion which he had made to be cleared up by Stephen, an old man of over 50. Stephen expected Volgin to remunerate him, as he said, being so accustomed to the work that he did not feel the slightest repugnance for it. Glancing at a mirror and feeling satisfied with his appearance, Volgin went into the dining room. There, thanks to the efforts of the housekeeper, the footman, and under-butler, the latter had risen at dawn in order to run home to sharpen his son's scythe, breakfast was ready. On a spotless white cloth stood a boiling, shiny silver samovar, at least it looked like silver, a coffee pot, hot milk, cream, butter, and all sorts of fancy white bread and biscuits. The only persons at table were the second son of the house, his tutor, a student, and the secretary. The host, who was an active member of the Zemstvo and a great farmer, had already left the house, having gone at 8 o'clock to attend to his work. Volgin, while drinking his coffee, talked to the student and the secretary about the weather and yesterday's wind, and discussed Theodorite's peculiar behavior the night before, as he had been very rude to his father without the slightest cause. Theodorite was the grown-up son of the house, and a ne'er-do-well. His name was Theodore, but someone had once called him Theodorite, either as a joke or to tease him, and, as it seemed funny, the name stuck to him, although his doings were no longer in the least amusing. So it was now. He had been to the university, but left it in his second year, and joined a regiment of horse guards. But he gave that up also, and was now living in the country, doing nothing, finding fault, and feeling discontented with everything. Theodorite was still in bed. So were the other members of the household, Anna Mikhailovna, its mistress, her sister, the widow of a general, and a landscape painter who lived with the family. Volgin took his Panama hat from the hall table, it had cost 20 rubles, and his cane with its carved ivory handle, and went out. Crossing the veranda, gay with flowers, he walked through the flower garden, in the center of which was a raised round bed, with rings of red, white, and blue flowers, and the initials of the mistress of the house done in carpet bedding in the center. Leaving the flower garden, Volgin entered the avenue of lime trees, hundreds of years old, which peasant girls were tidying and sweeping with spades and brooms. The gardener was busy measuring, and a boy was bringing something in a cart. Passing these, Volgin went into the park of at least 125 acres, filled with fine old trees and intersected by a network of well-kept walks. Smoking as he strolled, Volgin took his favorite path past the summer house into the fields beyond. It was pleasant in the park, but it was still nicer in the fields. On the right, some women who were digging potatoes formed a mass of bright red and white color. On the left were wheat fields, meadows, and grazing cattle, and in the foreground, slightly to the right, were the dark, dark oaks of Littleport. Volgin took a deep breath and felt glad that he was alive, especially here in his cousin's home, where he was so thoroughly enjoying the rest from his work at the bank. Lucky people to live in the country, he thought. True, what with his farming and his zemstvo, the owner of the estate has very little peace even in the country, but that is his own lookout. Volgin shook his head, lit another cigarette, and stepping out firmly with his powerful feet clad in his thick English boots, began to think of the heavy winter's work in the bank that was in front of him. I shall be there every day from 10 to 2, sometimes even till 5, and the board meetings, and private interviews with clients, then the Duma, whereas here, it is delightful. It may be a little dull, but it is not for long. He smiled. After a stroll in Littleport, he turned back, going straight across a fallow field which was being ploughed. A herd of cows, calves, sheep, and pigs, which belonged to the village community, was grazing there. The shortest way to the park was to pass through the herd. He frightened the sheep, which ran away one after another, and were followed by the pigs, of which 2 little ones stared solemnly at him. The shepherd boy called to the sheep and cracked his whip. How far behind Europe we are, thought Volgin, recalling his frequent holidays abroad. You would not find a single cow like that anywhere in Europe. Then, wanting to find out where the path which branched off from the one he was on led to, and who was the owner of the herd, he called to the boy, "Whose herd is it?" The boy was so filled with wonder, verging on terror, when he gazed at the hat, the well-brushed beard, and above all the gold-rimmed eyeglasses, that he could not reply at once. When Volgin repeated his question, the boy pulled himself together and said, "Ours." "But whose is ours?" said Volgin, shaking his head and smiling. The boy was wearing shoes of plaited birch bark, bands of linen round his legs, a dirty, unbleached shirt, ragged at the shoulder, and a cap the peak of which had been torn. "Whose is ours?" "The Pirogov village herd." "How old are you?" "I don't know." "Can you read?" "No, I can't." "Didn't you go to school?" "Yes, I did." "Couldn't you learn to read?" "No." "Where does that path lead?" The boy told him, and Volgin went on towards the house, thinking how he would chaff Nicholas Petrovich about the deplorable condition of the village schools in spite of all his efforts. On approaching the house, Volgin looked at his watch and saw that it was already past 11. He remembered that Nicholas Petrovich was going to drive to the nearest town and that he had meant to give him a letter to post to Moscow, but the letter was not written. The letter was a very important one to a friend, asking him to bid for him for a picture of the Madonna which was to be offered for sale at an auction. As he reached the house, he saw at the door 4 big, well-fed, well-groomed, thoroughbred horses harnessed to a carriage, the black lacquer of which glistened in the sun. The coachman was seated on the box in a caftan with a silver belt, and the horses were jingling their silver bells from time to time. A bare-headed, barefooted peasant in a ragged caftan stood at the front door. He bowed. Volgin asked what he wanted. "I have come to see Nicholas Petrovich." "What about?" "Because I am in distress. My horse has died." Volgin began to question him. The peasant told him how he was situated. He had 5 children, and this had been his only horse. Now it was gone. He wept. "What are you going to do?" "To beg." And he knelt down and remained kneeling in spite of Volgin's expostulations. "What is your name?" "Dmitry Sudarikov," answered the peasant, still kneeling. Volgin took 3 rubles from his purse and gave them to the peasant, who showed his gratitude by touching the ground with his forehead and then went into the house. His host was standing in the hall. "Where is your letter?" he asked, approaching Volgin. "I am just off." "I'm awfully sorry. I'll write it this minute if you will let me. I forgot all about it. It's so pleasant here that one can forget anything." "All right, but do be quick. The horses have already been standing a quarter of an hour, and the flies are biting viciously. Can you wait, Arsenti?" he asked the coachman. "Why not?" said the coachman, thinking to himself. "Why do they order the horses when they aren't ready? The rush the grooms and I had, just to stand here and feed the flies." Directly. Volgin went towards his room, but turned back to ask Nicholas Petrovich about the begging peasant. "Did you see him? He's a drunkard, but still he is to be pitied. Do be quick." Volgin got out his case, with all the requisites for writing, wrote the letter, made out a check for 180 rubles, and sealing down the envelope, took it to Nicholas Petrovich. "Goodbye." Volgin read the newspapers till luncheon. He only read the liberal papers, the Russian Gazette, Speech, sometimes the Russian Word, but he would not touch the New Times, to which his host subscribed. While he was scanning at his ease the political news, the Tsar's doings, the doings of president and ministers and decisions in the Duma, and was just about to pass on to the general news, theatres, science, murders and cholera, he heard the luncheon bell ring. Thanks to the efforts of upwards of 10 human beings, counting laundresses, gardeners, cooks, kitchen maids, butlers and footmen, the table was sumptuously laid for 8, with silver water jugs, decanters, kvass, wine, mineral waters, cut glass, and fine table linen, while 2 men servants were continually hurrying to and fro, bringing in and serving, and then clearing away the hors d'oeuvre and the various hot and cold courses. The hostess talked incessantly about everything that she had been doing, thinking and saying, and she evidently considered that everything that she thought, said, or did was perfect, and that it would please everyone except those who were fools. Volgin felt and knew that everything she said was stupid, but it would never do to let it be seen, and so he kept up the conversation. Theodorite was glum and silent. The student occasionally exchanged a few words with the widow. Now and again there was a pause in the conversation, and then Theodorite interposed, and everyone became miserably depressed. At such moments the hostess ordered some dish that had not been served, and the footman hurried off to the kitchen or to the housekeeper and hurried back again. Nobody felt inclined either to talk or to eat, but they all forced themselves to eat and to talk, and so luncheon went on. The peasant who had been begging because his horse had died was named Dmitri Sudarikov. He had spent the whole day before he went to the squire over his dead horse. First of all, he went to the knacker, Sanin, who lived in a village near. The knacker was out, but he waited for him, and it was dinner time when he had finished bargaining over the price of the skin. Then he borrowed a neighbour's horse to take his own to a field to be buried, as it is forbidden to bury dead animals near a village. Adrian would not lend his horse because he was getting in his potatoes, but Stephen took pity on Mitri and gave way to his persuasion. He even lent a hand in lifting the dead horse into the cart. Mitri tore off the shoes from the forelegs and gave them to his wife. One was broken, but the other one was whole. While he was digging the grave with a spade, which was very blunt, the knacker appeared and took off the skin, and the carcass was then thrown into the hole and covered up. Mitri felt tired and went into Matrena's hut, where he drank half a bottle of vodka with Sanin to console himself. Then he went home, quarreled with his wife, and lay down to sleep on the hay. He did not undress, but slept just as he was, with a ragged coat for a coverlet. His wife was in the hut with the girls. There were 4 of them, and the youngest was only 5 weeks old. Mitri woke up before dawn as usual. He groaned as the memory of the day before broke in upon him, how the horse had struggled and then fallen down. Now there was no horse, and all he had was the price of the skin, 4 rubles and 80 kopecks. Getting up, he arranged the linen bands on his legs and went through the yard into the hut. His wife was putting straw into the stove with one hand. With the other, she was holding a baby girl to her breast, which was hanging out of her dirty chemise. Mitri crossed himself 3 times, turning towards the corner in which the icons hung, and repeated some utterly meaningless words, which he called prayers, to the Trinity and the Virgin, the Creed, and our Father. "Isn't there any water?" "The girl's gone for it." "I've got some tea. Will you go up to the squire?" "Yes, I'd better." The smoke from the stove made him cough. He took a rag off the wooden bench and went into the porch. The girl had just come back with the water. Mitri filled his mouth with water from the pail and squirted it out on his hands, took some more in his mouth to wash his face, dried himself with the rag, then parted and smoothed his curly hair with his fingers and went out. A little girl of about 10, with nothing on but a dirty shirt, came towards him. "Good morning, Uncle Mitri," she said. "You are to come and thrash." "All right, I'll come," replied Mitri. He understood that he was expected to return the help given the week before by Kumashkir, a man as poor as he was himself, when he was thrashing his own corn with a horse-driven machine. "Tell them I'll come. I'll come at lunchtime. I've got to go to Ugrumi." Mitri went back to the hut, and changing his birch-bark shoes and the linen bands on his legs, started off to see the squire. After he had got 3 rubles from Volgin and the same sum from Nicholas Petrovich, he returned to his house, gave the money to his wife, and went to his neighbour's. The thrashing machine was humming, and the driver was shouting. The lean horses were going slowly round him, straining at their traces. The driver was shouting to them in a monotone, "Now there, my dears!" Some women were unbinding sheaves, others were raking up the scattered straw and ears, and others again were gathering great armfuls of corn and handing them to the men to feed the machine. The work was in full swing. In the kitchen garden, which Mitri had to pass, a girl, clad only in a long shirt, was digging potatoes which she put into a basket. "Where's your grandfather?" asked Mitri. "He's in the barn." Mitri went to the barn and set to work at once. The old man of 80 knew of Mitri's trouble. After greeting him, he gave him his place to feed the machine. Mitri took off his ragged coat, laid it out of the way near the fence, and then began to work vigorously, raking the corn together and throwing it into the machine. The work went on without interruption until the dinner hour. The cocks had crowed 2 or 3 times, but no one paid any attention to them, not because the workers did not believe them, but because they were scarcely heard for the noise of the work and the talk about it. At last, the whistle of the squire's steam thresher sounded 3 miles away, and then the owner came into the barn. He was a straight old man of 80. "It's time to stop," he said. "It's dinner time." Those at work seemed to redouble their efforts. In a moment, the straw was cleared away. The grain that had been thrashed was separated from the chaff and brought in, and then the workers went into the hut. The hut was smoke-begrimed, as its stove had no chimney, but it had been tidied up, and benches stood round the table, making room for all those who had been working, of whom there were 9, not counting the owners. Bread, soup, boiled potatoes, and kvass were placed on the table. An old one-armed beggar with a bag slung over his shoulder came in with a crutch during the meal. "Peace be to this house. A good appetite to you. For Christ's sake, give me something." "God will give it to you," said the mistress, already an old woman and the daughter-in-law of the master. "Don't be angry with us." An old man, who was still standing near the door, said, "Give him some bread, Martha. How can you?" "I'm only wondering whether we shall have enough." "Oh, it is wrong, Martha. God tells us to help the poor. Cut him a slice." Martha obeyed. The beggar went away. The man in charge of the thrashing machine got up, said Grace, thanked his hosts, and went away to rest. Mitri did not lie down, but ran to the shop to buy some tobacco. He was longing for a smoke. While he smoked, he chatted to a man from Demensk, asking the price of cattle, as he saw that he would not be able to manage without selling a cow. When he returned to the others, they were already back at work again, and so it went on till the evening. Among these downtrodden, duped, and defrauded men who are becoming demoralized by overwork and being gradually done to death by underfeeding, there are men living who consider themselves Christians, and others so enlightened that they feel no further need for Christianity or for any religion, so superior do they appear in their own esteem. And yet their hideous, lazy lives are supported by the degrading, excessive labor of these slaves, not to mention the labor of millions of other slaves, toiling in factories to produce samovars, silver, carriages, machines, and the like for their use. They live among these horrors, seeing them and yet not seeing them, although often kind at heart. Old men and women, young men and maidens, mothers and children, poor children who are being vitiated and trained into moral blindness. Here is a bachelor grown old, the owner of thousands of acres, who has lived a life of idleness, greed, and overindulgence, who reads the New Times and is astonished that the government can be so unwise as to permit Jews to enter the university. There is his guest, formerly the governor of a province, now a senator with a big salary, who reads with satisfaction that a Congress of lawyers has passed a resolution in favor of capital punishment. Their political enemy, NP, reads a liberal paper and cannot understand the blindness of the government in allowing the union of Russian men to exist. Here is a kind, gentle mother of a little girl reading a story to her about Fox, a dog that lamed some rabbits. And here is this little girl. During her walks, she sees other children, barefooted, hungry, hunting for green apples that have fallen from the trees, and so accustomed is she to the sight that these children do not seem to her to be children such as she is, but only part of the usual surroundings, the familiar landscape. Why is this?